Hello and welcome to another episode of the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubunmi Olajide and thank you for joining us again this week. I hope you're all staying safe and doing well. On this episode, we're going to be talking about investments in technologies that are driving the energy transition. I know we've heard a lot about divestments away from fossil fuel projects, about how big banks and other institutions are committing to cut their investments into projects related to the fossil fuel industry or specifically to the oil and gas industry. And if you're wondering if they're cutting investments or if they want to cut investments from these technologies, where is the investments of the future going to go when it comes to technologies that have to do with the energy transition? And this is what we're going to be talking about on this episode today. So it's going to be a very interesting look from a very interesting guest as well to what the future might look like and if it's right to cut divestments from certain technology over another, and which ones are the ones that we should focus on in order to get us to a future where we have the best technology working for us as we strive towards a cleaner energy future. So this episode will be hosted by Jennifer Ania, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
On today's episode with me, I have Robert West. Robert West is, I would say, pretty much, he has everything under wraps when it comes to the energy industry. So let's just leave it there. So on that note, I would say good evening and hi, welcome to the Energy Talk, Robert.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, so let's just go straight into that. But first of all, I would leave you to introduce yourself first. So who is Robert West?
Well, I guess the answer to that is I'm a bit of an energy nerd. I've spent the last 10 years covering energy in the City of London and on Wall Street. The usual suspects: ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, BP, Total. Going around meeting investors, talking about this industry, it's becoming a wasteland. And, our industry is going through its biggest ever period of change. And specifically, the change is how are we going to do an energy transition? And that's the single most important question gripping the entire sector right now. It's this question of how are we going to meet the energy needs of the future and take out all of the CO2. And, we're not going to do this by dismantling the entire global economy and going back and living in the forest. We're going to do it by finding things that, leading decision makers can put capital into, things that are going to make the energy system better and earn a return for the companies and investors that back them. So what are those things? And that was the rationale for founding Thunderset Energy. We're the research consultancy for energy technologies, and we help our clients find these opportunities to make the energy system better. And we do this with research, data, and models, and they're all online on our website at www.thundersetenergy.com.
Yeah, speaking of the name Thunderset Energy, how did that come about? That is really fascinating to hear.
Well, it's from a poem by T.S. Eliot, who's personally my favorite writer. And the poem's called The Wasteland. And it's about this desolate world where nothing can grow and no one can prosper. It's a wasteland. And, we can't let the world become a wasteland. And at the end of the poem, the final section is called What the Thunder Said. And the thunder speaks to the world. And what the thunder says is, is the solution. It's the antidote to how do we fix this problem. And that's kind of the metaphor for our industry is, we can't let the world become a wasteland. We can't let the energy industry become, part of this wasteland. What are we going to do to fix this? What is the thunder going to say that fixes this problem? And that's the metaphor behind the stuff we work on.
Energy. That's interesting. So for me, I think your company is like one of the very rare ones you find, in the sense that you are looking also at energy investments and technology, I would say. So it's almost like I don't think anybody really looks at technology in the energy industry really as much as it is, because there's really nothing happening in there right now. So how have you been able to bring yourself up onto speed on that and carry everyone along? Because, like I said, no one really understands.
Well, there's three things we look at, and these things are really important. The first one is economics. So, every technology we look at, everything, we're modeling the economics. How much does it cost? How does it earn a return? And that's the first component. Because unless you can generate a double-digit return in a technology, one, is it going to be worth the risk to invest in it? And two, are you going to move the needle in an industry that spends $2 trillion a year? So economics is the first part. The second is, people sometimes joke that a technology is just something that doesn't work yet. And we can't invest in that. We can't scale that up. So another big component of what we do is to look at how ready these technologies are. We want to weed out the science projects and find the things that are really getting to the cusp of commercialization, because those are going to be the ones that are exciting and move markets and create opportunities. And the third component, when we look at a technology, is how much CO2 can it take out? And really combining these things is important, because it allows us to put numbers to taking out all the CO2. We want to take out CO2 using low-cost options. We want to avoid having to do the high-cost options, because that's going to make our energy industry very uncompetitive. And so, by putting numbers and objective data to this question, we really hope we can get away from the emotion and the noise that kind of tends to make this debate so difficult.
Yeah, pretty said on speaking of economics, technology, and removing CO2. And I'm going to talk a bit on removing CO2. So on that note, let's quickly do a backtrack on all the rounds up of clean energy sources and the investment in CO2 and how it definitely would affect countries.
Okay, well, look, I think that the best way to tackle that is to say, what is our decarbonized energy mix going to look like? And, based on all of our models, based on all of our data, we can build up a picture of what is going to be the easiest, most economical way to decarbonize the world by 2050. And so we have a model for this. The world's going to be, today the world is about 65,000 terawatt hours of energy per year. That's equivalent to, a kitchen toaster running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for every man, woman, and child on the planet. And by 2050, that number is going to double. It's going to be about 120,000 terawatt hours per year. So how are we going to meet this energy demand without, CO2 emissions getting to 80 billion tons, which is, what they would do if we just kept going on the way we're going? Well, about 20% of it comes from renewables, but not more. The remaining 80% comes from fossil fuels, and they've got to be the cleanest, most efficient, lowest carbon fossil fuels possible. In practice, this means, a huge expansion of natural gas, and the remaining CO2, because we're still going to be emitting gross CO2, it's got to be taken out. It's either got to be decarbonized at source, which means a bunch of carbon capture technologies, or it's got to be offset, which means nature-based solutions. And we think you can use this. You can decarbonize the entire energy system for a cost that's entirely below $90 a ton. That's the upper limit. Anything that costs more than that, we're not going to need in this system. The average is going to be about $30 to $50 a ton. And a third of this stuff is not going to have a cost. It's actually going to make you a profit as the company or the investor who gets behind it, without any carbon price whatsoever. So that's the way it looks to us like it's going to be the best way to do this. It doesn't involve a huge scale up of renewables. It doesn't involve these slightly challenging concepts like a hydrogen economy, which we don't think really is going to work. It involves taking the infrastructure we've got and taking out the CO2, and we can do this.
Yeah, then if we're going to carry both sides of the world along with this, both sides of the world in terms of both developing and developed countries, so how do you think this negatively and positively impacts developed countries and developing countries? I am much more keen, or maybe say biased, to developing countries because I come from one. So, and majority of what developing countries still use are still CO2 heavily bent. So doing this, how do you think it would affect this side of the world?
No, that's That's exactly the right question, because one of the things that worries me most when you have this debate is you see some of the solutions that are being proposed, and they're incredibly expensive. We're not talking about stuff at $30 to $50 a ton. We're talking about stuff at $300 to $800 a ton. And if you think we can go and take these to people who need affordable energy, then I'm not sure this is entirely thought through. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things that really scares me is, developing a sort of two-tier energy market where some countries, some countries effectively end up being denied access to energy, and that's not going to help anyone. Mm-hmm. So, we need to find low-cost solutions that can be scaled up in all markets and make energy better for everybody.
Yeah. So do you have examples of this low cost options?
Well, I think it's hard to talk specifics and generalities at the same time. We're talking about an area that represents 6.5 billion people across 7 continents right now. And that's the emerging world, and there's different factors everywhere. But let me say a few general things that I think are going to be important. So, one, when it comes to building new renewables, to establish the first access to electricity, the marginal cost here is somewhere between 6 to 7 cents a kilowatt hour on average for those first projects that come into a grid. And this is the lowest cost way of developing electricity anywhere. And what we can do with this electricity is we can also create efficiency gains. So, if you think about a combustion process to generate, say, motive power, these things tend to be between 15 and 30% efficient. And the electric equivalents of these things can tend to be 70 to 80% efficient. So, here we've got a double gain. If you think about someone in the emerging world burning a fuel for for any reason, we can do a cheaper fuel that is twice as efficient and take out the carbon at the same time. And this is good in some applications, but it's also less good in others. Particularly the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And so we're going to need backup. And really on everything that that we can screen, natural gas is going to be the best backup. So I'll give you a number. If we look around the market that we've been screening for 2050, we think the biggest CO2 saving in the whole world, bigger than renewables, is taking coal out of the mix and replacing it with natural gas. That will do 25% of all of the CO2 reductions. And so, this has to work economically. And when it comes to building a new gas-fired power plant, if we can run this thing at 70 to 80% utilization for base power, then I think you can take out half the CO2 compared to doing this with coal. Natural gas is 0.35 tons per megawatt hour of CO2 emissions. Coal is 0.85. That's a 0.5 ton per megawatt hour saving. So we've got to build these gas value chains. And then the final component, Jennifer, is we got to take out the CO2 from natural gas. So one of the markets that's emerging that's really exciting is nature-based solutions. This is effectively building forests, and in all parts of the world, because if we could have a global carbon price, something around $15 to $30 a ton, I think you could reforest about 3 billion acres. That's 8% of the world's land mass. And the extra CO2 pulled out of the atmosphere every year by those forests would buy us the carbon budget for 85 million barrels a day of oil and 400 trillion cubic feet a year of gas. So that's how you could decarbonize the whole world, using a technology that's not 10 years away from being commercial, but a technology called a tree, which has been commercial for about 500 million years. And, this is actually, I say, you asked about emerging market opportunities. Well, this is a huge opportunity because, where do we have land and people and the ability to build forests. And the land, we know where it's spread around the world. And I think what we'll be able to do is create those carbon credits and sell them, and that will be a commercial opportunity, and will be so much cheaper than some of these high cost decarbonization solutions, which, are being advocated by people who, in my view, just haven't done the numbers.
It's interesting to know how it has come a full circle and come back to environment at the end of the day. So having spoken on that, let's then go straight to the pretty much investments in clean energy sources at the moment that are springing up.
Well, okay. So if you look around the world, about $300 billion a year is being invested in wind and solar at the moment. For that, we're adding about 270 terawatt hours per year of new wind and new solar into the grid. And that's an important number to keep in perspective, because, we were just talking about the size of the energy market and how it's currently 65,000 terawatt hours per year. If we're growing wind and solar at a rate of 270 terawatt hours per year, how long is it going to take to transform a 65,000 terawatt hour system? It's going to take 300 years. And this is why we need new technologies coming in the wind and solar space, if we were going to accelerate their share. So what we have right now is that we have wind and solar actually quite heavily concentrated in the grids in, say, Germany, California, the UK. All of these areas, we're hitting about 25% of the grid coming from renewables. And this is a really crucial time, because that's about the time when, the wind and the sun are volatile. They don't always generate energy. And when you have 25% share of the total grid, this is when actually on the windiest, sunniest moments of the windiest, sunniest days, wind and solar will be doing 100% of the necessary grid. And what that means is that, if you start building more wind and solar past that 25% point, in those windy, sunny moments, the grid's already full. The new wind, the new solar doesn't have anywhere to go, and you start seeing it curtailed. So the first thing we think is going to happen in wind and solar is we're going to start seeing curtailment in these countries that have been most active in building them out. And this means funny things like negative power prices, new projects getting financed at higher costs. But it also means that in the wind and solar industry, we've got to go where we haven't gone before. It's no good building more solar in California, once solar is already saturated. How do we get solar into the grid in other places? And so that's the first challenge. That's not a technology challenge as much as a markets challenge. Then when it comes to next generation wind, next generation solar, there are some really interesting concepts coming through in terms of kite technologies on wind, or next generation solar materials in the solar space, or even next generation concentrated solar to generate industrial heat. So, we're screening some of these things, and they're very exciting. We could go into, one or two technologies if we have time and talk about them. But I think, overall, the big challenge in renewables is going to increasingly become this market saturation challenge, and how we're going to move past it.
I was thinking, on my own part, the challenge when it comes to renewables is the fact that it's not available all around. That was what my own thought was, when it comes to renewables.
That's right. That's why when we model the optimal grid, you're going to have maybe 20-25% renewables in the optimal electricity grid. But you don't necessarily have more than that. And actually, when you push more than that into a grid, then the costs start going up again. We have models on all of this on our website.
Yeah. Then when it comes to, we haven't touched on oil and gas because, at the end of the day, it's still part of what goes into the energy mix. We definitely we have to cut down on the CO2s and pretty much increase technology on that aspect that makes it a bit more cleaner for the society at large. So how does that play into this mix?
Well, that's the mission for the best oil and gas companies in the world today is how are we going to do this? And there are some areas where you're seeing some really good inroads. I mean, just this morning, we published a research note about the next generation of offshore fields. We think the technology is coming through to develop offshore fields entirely subsea, not putting anything above the surface. And actually, there are some advantages of doing it this way. You take out about a third of the cost because you don't need a large production facility. Mm-hmm. And this stuff is all electrically powered. These subsea compression systems will get about 80% total efficiency compared to about 30 to 40% to the gas-driven compressors on board a platform. So actually, screening some of these projects as they're being deployed in Norway, we think they're effectively zero carbon projects. There's no CO2 to run the equipment because it's fired by Norwegian hydropower and the electricity is piped offshore. There's no CO2 in building a giant 30,000 ton platform because you don't have one. Mm-hmm. And there's no CO2 in flying people to work on helicopters to the platform or sending large platform supply vessels out there. And we quantified the CO2 savings of all of that. It's material, it's exciting. But it also increases the value of the resource by 50%. It increases the NPV by 50%. And so, in the work, we would go through 2,000 patents and we say, which companies have the best technology to do this? Which majors, which service companies? Equinor screens incredibly well on the majors side. Some of the OneSubsea patents have really impressed me from going through those. So that's an example. And we're seeing so many things like this when it comes to, digital technologies that uplift production facility efficiency, or the next generation catalysts coming through refineries, or the technologies to take out methane leaks, which is a 125 times more potent greenhouse gas on an instantaneous basis. We've got to get all these methane leaks out of the industry. Mm-hmm. The best companies are working on this. And we've been through 5,000 patents around the industry in detail to actually rank, who has these technologies, who's doing it best, who's reinventing the way they build these facilities. And there's just some incredibly exciting progress being made by the best firms here.
Yeah, that is really good to look at. And for me, I think that with the way data also is springing into the mix, it's definitely going to make it one that is really versatile, because it now cuts across board. I mean, you have data put in electricity, we have data also in oil and gas, and there's data also in, other forms of energy at the moment. And then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, what then is available for both sides of the economy to work with, in the sense that data we see now is becoming a big source of information. And I don't think that the world, or maybe I don't think companies are utilizing this that much. Maybe the oil and gas industry, maybe. I just heard of a couple of them that use data to analyze which particular processors are working or which particular equipments are really doing really good. But then at the end of the day, it's like, how best can you utilize data to make sure that your work is being done good?
Exactly. I mean, the platforms being built around the industry today are nothing like the platforms of the past. We'll have 100,000 pieces of equipment being monitored in real time, and we can prevent stuff breaking before it breaks. Mm-hmm. And this is all what we want to see in terms of lowering cost, improving efficiency, lowering CO2. And I think one of the debates we're always drawn into is this debate about how do we get more resource in the hands of companies who are going to produce it responsibly? How do we help companies improve those processes? And, if you live and breathe this stuff and you see it every day, there's some wonderful progress being made here, and we should kind of celebrate those wins and reward the companies that are doing them. And, the others, we should encourage them to do the same.
Yeah, and before I let you go, my very last question is, when it comes to investments in energy technology, I specifically have a problem with microgrids, in the sense that when it comes to investment, I don't know if they are not properly done, But at the end of the day, the one particular thing I see running across board is the risk analysis. It's never been done properly because I don't understand, or I don't see where you will run, say, your Excel sheets, or you run your sensitivity analysis, and then at the end of the day, you're supposed to know why, or it's supposed to tell you if investments are properly done, or if they would last you up to, say, 3 years before you start to get a negative NPV. But then it's really not the case, and you end up seeing companies going ahead and taking the bait for this, wanting to do them, and it pretty much doesn't sit well with me. And I wanted to hear your own point of view of this, because I think it happens. Maybe you haven't seen it, but I have seen most of this happen all the time. And being that I am from my country, and I think it's pretty much relevant to maybe say other developing countries, and maybe say sub-Saharan countries, but you would see most energy projects go on, and at the end of the day, the investment never really falls through to the second or the third year. But you're wondering why this specific thing happened. Is it either coming from a point of, okay, I'm just not quite comfortable with it really?
Well, look, I think there are some concepts that attract a lot of hype and attract a lot of excitement around them, because they sound good and they get backing from people who want them to go ahead. But this is exactly why we think it's important that people run numbers and people have objective data to say, is this project going to make a return? And when it comes to some of these big concepts that are being talked about in the energy transition, you mentioned macro grids. If we're going to put money into these things, the best investors, the best companies, we've got to understand the numbers. We've got to understand the economics. And this is the sort of work that our company helps people with.
That's good. All right. It was really good to have you. Something you said that stood out for me was the part where you mentioned the part where most CO2s come out of, and you said that 20% of CO2 comes from renewables. And it was like, okay, that's interesting to know, because not everybody.
Sorry, just to be clear about that that means when we're taking out the CO2 from the world, 20% of the reductions are going to come from renewables. So renewables themselves, they do have a small CO2 footprint. If you're talking about a wind turbine, it'll be maybe 60 kilograms of CO2 per BOE. If you're talking about a solar panel, it'll be maybe 70 to 100 kilograms per BOE. But compared to the combustion emissions of natural gas through to coal, we're talking about fossil fuels being between 300 and 1,000 kilograms per BOE. So they're not zero carbon renewables, but they're a lot better than fossil fuels on a sort of pure metric of kilograms per BOE. So that just to make sure I said that right and didn't leave any false impressions, because that's certainly not what I want to do.
Yeah, definitely understand that. All right, good to have you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. This was very insightful.
And thanks for having me. And I hope there's lots more interesting discussions ahead on this topic of energy transition, energy technologies, and how do we build a good energy system for the future.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. This is a topic that I hope we have time to revisit sometime in the future. Probably not in this season, but I would love us to cover up a more in-depth review of what investments would look like in energy technology in the next few years. And I hope we get a chance to do that, and I hope you join us for that as well, whenever that may be. So thank you for joining us this week. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. Subscribe to the podcast if you aren't already. Be sure to leave us a rating and a review so we know your feedback, and get in touch with us by email, energytalk@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a wonderful week. We will see you again on the next episode. This episode is produced by yours truly, hosted by Jennifer Ania, and thanks to Jensen for the music in this episode. Have a lovely week and see you next time.